It may be quite a while before we see anything like this again. Oh, the organizations that have the resources, the Yankees, the Braves, the Cowboys, the Lakers, and the NBA, will almost always field contending teams. But the days of continuity may be ending. Even on the best teams, there's now so much turnover that it's becoming ever harder to follow and identify with teams.
As time goes on, we start to forget the finer details of the past. Only the most prominent memories remain. Michael Jordan basically summarizes the 90s. The 2000s were remembered mostly for the dominance of the Spurs and the Lakers. And the 2010s will be remembered primarily for the Warriors dynasty. And LeBron. Also LeBron. There's a lot of power in that. Winning multiple titles, and ideally doing so with some style, is the way to be remembered as a legendary team. The way to be immortalized in the history of this league. The way to keep people talking about you well after your playing days are over. Bob Costas ended up being right. Honestly, eerily prophetic, even if he was a little early. The age of the dynasty seems to be dying out in recent years. There hasn't been a repeat champion in 6 seasons now. It's been a different team every single year. This new era of parity may have been what fans were hoping for, but it seems that those hopes were a bit misguided, as the NBA Finals and playoffs in general have seen a significant decline in viewership ever since the turn of the decade. The NBA Championship just doesn't have the same aura. So let's look back at NBA history, examine these dynasties and figure out what made them so great, and maybe along the way, we can find out why everybody stopped caring about the NBA Finals. Before we get into this deep dive, I want to thank our sponsor, Fabletics. When I was unboxing this month's haul, I immediately noticed how everything felt so soft and high quality, and when I put it on, I loved how the water-repellent fabric kept me feeling fresh throughout a hard workout. When you sign up for the Fabletics VIP program, you get an amazing intro offer of 2 shorts for just $19, and as a VIP member, you will save up to 50% off all day, every day on all products. It's kind of like if your favorite store always had exclusive sales every single day. In addition to consistent discounts, each month your membership will get you 1 credit to redeem for a 2-piece outfit or any product up to $100. Plus, the membership is flexible. Skip as often as you like and you will not be charged. Just skip between the 1st and 5th of the month. Other VIP perks include monthly drops, early access to styles, VIP-only sales, and a free membership to the Fit app. Get 2 shorts for $19 when you sign up at fabletics.com/rusty. Check the link in the description and start your VIP membership today. And again, thanks to Fabletics for sponsoring this video. This video started out with a different premise in mind, but throughout the process of working on it, as well as looking at the discourse that was happening during the 2024 playoffs, we started to sense that something was wrong. We didn't realize just how much the lack of a dynasty's presence really changed everything. Also, for the record, I'm defining dynasties as teams with roughly the same core characters year after year that won at least 3 championships and did so at least every other year. 3 and 6 years is the bare minimum. Now, in some of the earlier history of the NBA, pretty much the first dynasty ended up being the single most dominant of them all. On April 29th, 1956, the 6'10" Bill Russell was drafted 2nd overall by the St. Louis Hawks, only to be traded that same day to Boston in exchange for 4-time All-NBA, 6-time All-Star, and first ever MVP of the All-Star Game, Ed McCully, along with a rookie Cliff Hagan, who would go on to be a 5-time All-Star in his own right. Boston's head coach / general manager Red Auerbach was obviously making a major dice roll in trading his established stud for a young defensive-minded big, especially considering how the meta of the 50s NBA wasn't one where the center was seen as a defensive first position like it is today. But this gamble would pay off in a major way, as in 1957, the Boston Celtics defeated those same St. Louis Hawks in the finals, winning the team's first ever NBA championship while being led by both their rookie big man Bill and coach Auerbach. The following season, Bill Russell won MVP, led the league in rebounds, and made All-NBA second team. Somehow. The Celtics and Hawks met again in the 1958 finals, and the Hawks would come out on top this time.
Time runs out, and the championship goes to the Hawks.
But over the next 11 seasons, Bill and Red would win 10 NBA championships, including 8 consecutive and 2 more versus St. Louis. Yeah, you heard that right. 10 rings in 11 years, and overall 11 in 13 seasons in the Bill Russell era. In the 54 years following the dynasty's final championship in 1969, nice, no NBA team has come anywhere close to surpassing this. In fact, this dynasty's 11 rings put them 4 ahead of the next best team's whole existence. Red Auerbach remained the head coach and GM for 9 of these titles before leaving the sidelines to start his lifelong term as Celtics team president, which was when Russell would take over as head coach for the next 3 seasons, the first ever black head coach in the NBA, failing to make the finals in his first year, but winning back-to-back championships following that, while also remaining the team's starting center at that. I mean, come on. That's pretty badass. Now, before we can learn anything, it's important to first recognize the context of this era. It is fundamentally different from modern ball. Hell, it's fundamentally different from the NBA in like 1980. The state of America at the time was pretty different too, specifically as it relates to race. One of the main reasons Bill Russell ended up a Celtic in the first place is that the Hawks, which traded him on draft night, were an all-white team, and it seemed like they intended on keeping it that way. In an interview with Bill Simmons on NBA TV, Russell said,
St. Louis was overwhelmingly racist.
So, were you frightened about potentially going to St. Louis? It definitely had a reputation.
No, if I'd have got drafted for St. Louis, I wouldn't have won the NBA.
The team's racism made them miss out on the greatest player of that generation. Oops! There were also insane rules as it related to roster construction, including territorial picks, weird shit like the Bulls drafting Olympic track star Carl Lewis in the 6th round with the 208th overall pick, and even unconfirmed theories about the Ice Capade's role in NBA trade negotiations. I could imagine how you'd hear all of this, not to mention see how different the sport looks, and determine that there's nothing to be gained from analyzing it. But no. History always has something to offer, regardless of how disconnected from it you feel, basketball or otherwise. And what stood out to me was how Red's approach to team building ended up being basically the perfect type of roster construction to most easily secure a title. The Celtics' defense was legendary, and Bill Russell was nothing short of an absolutely revolutionary defender. And on offense, their system was egalitarian, meaning that in principle, it was about equal opportunity for all. Boston, on their average playoff run, had about 6 players with double-digit points per game. So while offensively oriented superstar play matters and can often get you quite far, a team-oriented approach is the one way you can somewhat reliably beat a more top-heavy opposing team. One guy doing everything on offense is kind of predictable. Sometimes that does not matter because that one guy is too individually dominant, but if you can get a group of good to great players who play unselfishly, all with a common goal in mind, well, that's a hell of a deadly combination. As the Celtics would prove time and time and time and time and time and time and time. The other lesson here is one that I expected to learn, but I didn't realize just how obviously true commandment number 1 would look when you look at Red and Bill's Celtics. The lesson here being that for a team to be well built for winning, it has to be built well. And Boston had the NBA's original great team builder, like literally the very first one. Not only did Red Auerbach do double duty as the GM and head coach, but he orchestrated insane deals to keep this roster consistently loaded with talent that specifically fit his philosophies for a winning basketball team, doing both jobs exceptionally well in perfect harmony. And when I say insane deals, I am not exaggerating. Remember how I mentioned the Ice Capades earlier? Well, it was because of this legend about Red swindling the Rochester Royals, who had the #1 pick in the 1956 draft. Allegedly, Red convinced the Royals not to draft Bill Russell, in exchange for booking the traveling ice skating show, which was apparently the pinnacle of entertainment at the time, or at least for white people, I guess. See, the Celtics owner also owned the Ice Capades, and booking them in Rochester for several shows was basically a business proposition that just so happened to involve basketball. Though there are several things used to dispute this tale, whether it be the Royals owner denying it, the fact that they already had a Rookie of the Year center, or that Bill played poorly in a game that the Royals owner just so happened to be in attendance for pre-draft. Anyways, whether or not Red Auerbach actually finessed the Bill for Ice Capades trade aside, he at least for sure orchestrated the trade with the Hawks for Bill Russell directly. Like, he literally leveraged the racism of St. Louis in the 50s into helping a civil rights leader become the winningest player in NBA history. Red orchestrated multiple moves, made multiple great draft selections, saw potential where others missed it, and overall, he just did the GM shit way better than anyone at that time, dare I say ever. Dude's vibes were immaculate. He was constantly smoking cigars, and he was playing tricks on racists before it was even normal to not be racist. And he and Bill were besties till the bitter end. To quote Bill Russell in his biography titled Red and Me, My Coach, My Lifelong Friend, whenever I leave the Celtics locker room, even heaven wouldn't be good enough because anywhere else is a step down. With Red and Walter Brown, I was the freest athlete on the planet. I could always be myself with them, and they were always there for me. Bill and Red changed basketball forever, and another dynasty of any sort would not pop up for over a decade. But when it did, it came in the form of yet another ultra-historic duo. However, this time, rather than the basketball gods placing these two forces parallel on the same team, instead, they placed them in opposition, one of which played out west for the Los Angeles Lakers, and the other being yet another player for Boston. Those two forces were
Larry Bird. Follows his own shot. Oh, what a play. There comes a 4-on-1 break. Bounce to Cooper. Bounce to Kareem. All the way. Slammed up.
Boys to steal. Gets it over to DJ. Bird goes right into the pivot. Now DJ holds the ball. Back in the Bird. The fall away is gone. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Now.
5 seconds to go. Magic with a hook shot. Scores with 2.
If you were to try and remember the 80s, you might focus on the Showtime Lakers versus the not-so-Showtime Celtics. The former being known for their flair, and the latter being often remembered for their hardworking blue-collar ethos, as the entire decade didn't see a single final series that did not feature one or both of these teams. However, the less savory aspects, like the racially tense dynamic of this rivalry, are often glossed over. People love to talk about Magic Johnson versus Larry Bird, but neglect the importance of acknowledging the Great White Hope narrative that was prevalent regarding Bird at the time. Now, Boston and LA had faced off many times before. In fact, of the Celtics' 12 finals appearances in the 50s and 60s, they played the Lakers in 6 of them. Jerry West and Elgin Baylor constantly put up monster numbers, but they could not compete with Boston's team-oriented play style. To call LA versus Boston a rivalry wouldn't be accurate. It's more of a slaughter that one team benefits from and the other endures for the sake of sending Jerry West into a deep, deep depression.
I scored 25,192 points in my career. You know what keeps me up? If I'd have scored 10 more in just 5 games, I'd have 5 rings instead of fucking nightmares.
But the Lakers versus Celtics rivalry was never stronger than it was in the 80s, and a big reason for this was the player rivalry of Magic and Bird, who for both of the two teams and their superstars were, in a lot of ways, mirror images of each other. Both teams were led by a taller player who, rather than using their height to be dominant bigs inside, instead broke basketball barriers by being premier perimeter players. The 6'9" Magic Johnson was only an inch shorter than Bill Russell, but Magic wasn't a big or even a wing. He played point guard, not only being the lead ball handler, but also an all-time great passer. Actually, he's probably the all-time great passer. Larry Bird was also 6'9", and though he wasn't a point guard, he was still a very competent ball handler and a great passer in his own right. Bird also had a deadly jump shot, something players of that size usually couldn't depend on like he did. And naturally, both players didn't exclusively play from the perimeter. They both still had great touch, control, and creativity from the post. Magic and Bird also had a Hall of Fame scoring big as their best teammate. Earlier on, Kareem was much better, as he was the NBA's best player of the 70s after all. But as he got up there in age and Magic soon eclipsed him as the best player on the Lakers, any comparison between Kareem and McHale would have been rendered more fair than not. The Lakers and Celtics even both had a versatile third option that could do a bit of everything. For Boston, that was Robert Parrish, who I will always point out is really underrated. And for LA, it was Norm Nixon at first and James Worthy down the line. These were also two extremely well-managed teams. Red Auerbach was still the GM for the Celtics, and Pat Riley would go on to be on the Mount Rushmore of coaches in the NBA. These twin dynasties of the 80s are often credited for saving the NBA. Like, if I were to summarize the NBA before Bird and Magic, it'd be something like this.
God damn it, this is a dark fucking period!
They managed to save it, however, and create the league we've mostly known through today. One where superstars kind of define the meta of winning a championship. The roster construction really couldn't have gone any better for either of these teams. They were just leagues above everyone else in their conferences, especially the Lakers, who would miss the finals just twice in the decade. It's easy to throw together a bunch of names. It is much harder to throw together a bunch of names that also complement each other's skill sets. But both of these teams managed to do that, not just with their top 3 guys, but also with a plethora of great role players, with a select few even being Hall of Famers, including each having an MVP big from the 70s playing off of the bench in Bill Walton, who actually won 6th Man of the Year with Boston in '86, and Bob McAdoo. Boston had 2 Finals MVPs as role players in Dennis Johnson and Cedric Maxwell. LA with a couple of decorated vets too, being the '75 Rookie of the Year Jamal Wilkes and Michael Cooper, a guard who came off of the bench for LA and won the first ever Defensive Player of the Year award in NBA history in 1987. And he's one of the just 2 non-Hall of Famers on this list of 80s greats, but I want to shout out Byron Scott. Dude could hoop. Following his rookie year through the rest of the 80s, he was an 18 point per game scorer in 32 minutes, having 51, 39, 85 shooting splits on respectable for the era 3-point volume, and even being a decent defender on top of it. Just so many players that complemented each other's skill sets, masterfully constructed by two remarkably competent franchises. But all of this stuff is kind of obvious. So, what else can they teach us? Well, for one, versatility from larger players became more and more commonplace due to their success. Bird and Magic were nothing short of extremely influential and even arguably ahead of their time. Only 3 times prior to the 80s had a perimeter-oriented player been the best player on title teams, those players being Dennis Johnson, Rick Barry, and John Havlicek. Bird and Magic did it 8 times in the 80s, so there's a new meta in town. But what else? Bird and Magic are probably the earliest examples of players who fully realized and utilized scoring gravity, which is the idea that if you are a good scorer, you draw the attention of the defense, which should free up your teammates. Once that happens, you have to be a talented enough passer to make the right read and find that open player. Bird leaned more scoring while Magic leaned more playmaking, but both were very capable of either, and that made both much easier for them to perform. Hard to double Bird ISOing in the post if you know he's going to find a big at the rim or a shooter on the perimeter. And when Magic is driving, you're so sure that he's making the flashy he pass that you gear up for it, commit to that, and end up letting him get a layup. As it relates to playmaking as a whole, Magic is a complete statistical outlier. He averaged 11.7 assists a game in the playoff runs that ended in a title for LA. To put this into perspective, there has only ever been one other player who ever averaged double-digit assists for an entire championship run. That player was LeBron James in 2020. Magic Johnson isn't just an outlier. He is the outlier. Dude averaged 15 assists per game for an entire championship run. So in a way, Magic is such a once-in-a-lifetime playmaker that he illustrates how logistically unlikely it is that this type of player succeeds. It has only worked once to this degree, and in my opinion, it's likely going to be the last time it ever does. All of that said, I think we have enough familiarity with these two dueling dynasties. So there's no need for me to be coy about who we're going to talk about next. But in case you somehow don't know, then let me have the honor of introducing you to...
He's now 1 for 9. The look away to Livingston. Jordan. Oh, a spectacular move by Michael Jordan. Here's Jordan for 3. Yes! Did you see that look? Michael indicating he can't believe it. Well, Pippen got the snap. Here's Paxson for 3. Yes! Spread the floor. Pippen to Rock on the right. And a catch. On the 24. Here's Jordan. Did not have the shot.
17 seconds from game 7 or from championship number 6. Jordan open. Chicago with the lead.
There's plenty of analysis to do in basketball and many different areas you can look at that affect the results of the game. But sometimes all that shit gets thrown out the window when you draft someone that people end up calling Black Jesus. With the meta of the NBA shifting more towards defense, in part due to the almost dynasty Bad Boy Pistons teams winning back-to-back rings in 89 and 90, isolation offense grew in frequency across the NBA. The best players in the league, especially Michael Jordan, were guys that could score well against the slow-paced physical defense of the era. If you want to know more about the influence of the Bad Boy Pistons, then check out our video about offense. Link in the description, I'm sure. In the 90s, MJ famously won 3 championships with the Chicago Bulls, retired to play baseball for a year and a half in Alabama, then came back to the NBA just to almost immediately three-peat again, and for all 6 of his championship runs, he averaged 32.5 points per game across all of these series. For reference, in this hyper-defensive, lower-scoring era, the Bulls as a team averaged just 98 points per game. MJ was scoring a third of Chicago's points on his own. So in the same vein as Magic Johnson's assist averages, is there some kind of reverse lesson here about how getting God disguised as Michael Jordan, or any extreme outlier generational talent? Is this obviously the exception and not the rule? Well, not exactly. I think there's actually a decent proof of concept in MJ's Bulls that scales to any era. That being, when you have a superstar, don't fuck it up. Getting a gift from the basketball heavens, like landing Michael Jordan as the 3rd pick in the draft, doesn't in itself guarantee 6 championships. Sure, you've been given a golden ticket, a free space or 2 on bingo, a fast pass to a championship parade. But you still gotta spell bingo, you still have to file the permit for the parade, and you still have to make it out of the chocolate factory alive. Don't just go, oh well, I have 2 free spaces, time to sit back and wait for the win to come to me. Maybe not the best analogy because bingo is just the luck of the draw, and winning a championship is only % luck, but you get my point. Generational, all-time talents come and go, but all too often, years and years of their careers are wasted playing for piss-poor franchises who are content with milking their superstars for profit, but not reinvesting into winning a championship, much less forming a dynasty. We have the guy, therefore our job is done, right? No! You need to do things like trade for the perfect second star, like Scottie Pippen. Gamble on guys like Dennis Rodman, draft dudes like Horace Grant and Tony Kukoc, sign effective role players like Luke Longley and Steve Kerr, and bring on one of the greatest coaches of all time like Phil Jackson. To me, the fundamental difference between the careers of Michael Jordan and LeBron James, the 2 guys always getting discussed in the GOAT conversation, is that while MJ had a few years of no help in Chicago, LeBron never got anything but years of no help until he left Cleveland. Not to get too ahead of ourselves here, but the Cavs landed the perfect centerpiece with LeBron James in 2003. They thought shit was gonna be sweet and easy from there, waited for King James to bestow Cleveland with its first title, and fell asleep at the bingo table with fuck-ups like not making the obvious trade for Amari Stoudemire or letting Carlos Boozer just walk in free agency after his 2nd year. When you get a guy like LeBron, it's necessary to respect the opportunity that has been given to you as a franchise and do everything in your power to build around that guy with the intention of winning as many championships as you can without compromise. If you're so lucky to draft one of these capital G guys, those first 7 to 9 years with your superstar can go in the blink of an eye. Michael Jordan's Bulls were not a well-built team to begin with, as is the case with most young potential superstars who are one of the first in their class to be drafted. Chicago won 27 games the year prior to drafting Mike. Jerry Krause then took over as co-executive. After losing in round 1, not satisfied with this marginal improvement, Krause dropped the co from his title and became the exclusive GM, and promptly fired the coach to get his own guy in there, Stan Albeck, who was coming off of 5 consecutive winning seasons as an NBA head coach. Jordan then famously missed most of the next season with injury, and the Bulls were a mess without him. Coach Albeck was not on the same page as Jerry Krause in several instances, including when Michael returned from injury late in the year on a minutes restriction imposed by Krause, just for it to eventually be broken by Albeck, as Jordan carried the Bulls to 30 total wins on the year, which shockingly gives them a playoff berth. This came seemingly against Jerry's wishes, as he knew that, competitive spirit aside, the higher draft pick that comes with missing the playoffs would have given him better odds at striking gold in the draft a second time and finding a co-star for Michael Jordan. He knew that there was more potential value in that unknown than in the all but inevitable first round exit that would come from being a 30-win playoff team playing the '86 Celtics in round 1. And sure enough, despite Jordan putting up 43 points per game in the playoffs, the Bulls would be knocked out in a 3-game sweep versus Bird's Celtics. Krause would fire Coach Albeck, who had the 4th best record among active NBA coaches, and he would bring in Doug Collins, a scout he'd hired 2 months ago, just for them to go 40-42 and be swept in round 1 again by the Celtics. After 3 straight losing seasons, Jerry Krause decided to stop relying on lottery balls and make his own luck. In the 1987 draft, the Bulls identified Scottie Pippen as that gold that they've been hoping to strike, that next piece to their championship puzzle. But they knew that at number 8, he'd probably be already gone, so they just traded for him. All it cost was a phone call and swapping the guy they got at number 8, a 2nd round pick the following season, and a pick swap the year after that. And this tiny little gamble to get their guy paid off big time, as Scottie Pippen was the first of the dominoes that had to fall to form their dynasty. Pippen's rookie year was when Jordan and the Bulls finally had a winning season, getting all the way up to 50 wins, and they even made it out of round 1, only to be stopped by the bad boy Pistons in the 2nd round. The next season they would make it past round 2, only to get stopped by the bad boy Pistons in the conference finals. Then Krause fired Doug Collins, got the guy he supposedly wanted in the first place in Phil Jackson. The Bulls won 55 games, the 2nd highest Bulls win total of all time in 1990, only to be stopped by the bad boy Pistons in the conference finals again. But then, it finally happened. From 91 to 98, the Bulls would get Chicago 6 championship banners in those 8 years, going 6-0 in the finals, only missing the finals in seasons where Jordan was retired and or playing baseball, and having the winningest season of all time while they were at it with 72 wins in 1996. It took Jerry Krause and the Bulls 3 seasons to actually start taking action to build the Bulls into a contender, and it would take 6 early exits for this dynasty to actually begin. The window for winning at the highest level once you have your guy to build around closes faster than most general managers seem to think, which is why I think Jerry is up there with Red as one of the greats at this whole management thing. Sure, he got lucky and drafted the GOAT, or at least the GOAT for his era. And the talent on the floor matters a lot, but that doesn't mean Jerry Krause doesn't deserve a lot of credit. Between Magic, Bird, and Jordan, the NBA had a renaissance or two over about 20 years. And the paradigm that shifted the most was arguably the increased significance of superstar power, like that of these 3 legends. But it's still on management to assemble that perfect environment to allow that legend to be legendary. I don't know, this video is long as fuck. And while this Bulls dynasty epitomized the near perfect approach for urgently building around your superstar, the dynasty that followed it was one founded less on team harmony and more on team friction. Just like how Magic and Bird reached the peak of their powers in tandem and rivaled each other their whole careers, the basketball gods saw fit to place another rival pair of basketball prodigies of historic proportions in the NBA at the same time. But this go around, they were on the same team. because why not? Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal had beef. We all probably know that. Sadly, I think we know it a little bit too much, because it puts a real negative spin on the three-peat that these two pulled off. The likelihood of this duo even coming to be seems extremely rare. If Kobe made the more conventional decision to go to college for a year after high school, he almost certainly wouldn't have gotten drafted low enough for Vlade Divac to be enough to trade for him. And the way LA landed Shaq was also because of an incredibly odd gaffe by the Orlando Magic, a real lesson in terms of what not to do with generational talent. In the 96 offseason, the self-proclaimed most dominant player of all time was going into his 5th year. Up to this point in his young career, he averaged 27 points, 12.5 rebounds, and 2.8 blocks, while shooting nearly 60% from the field, including winning a scoring title in his 3rd season, being a 2nd in MVP voting, and even making a finals appearance. He was utterly unstoppable.
They changed how you had to construct your roster. You had to have 2 or 3 bigs just for fucking fouls. Not like good bigs, we just need bigs there. We need big bodies.
But his rookie contract was up, and if I was the general manager of the Magic, or at least at the bare minimum a fan of the Magic, I would want to re-sign this guy no matter what. Come hell or high water, Shaq is a member of the Magic going into that next season. Orlando wanted to lowball Shaq, and penny pinching proved to be not a good move when it comes to these superstars. First, Orlando offered a seriously under-market contract. Then they came back with something a little better, but still short of what LA was capable of offering. And ultimately, the difference in dollars offered was around $20 million. Considering how the perceived value of the Magic, is it even perceived? It's like objective. I don't even think it's perceived. It definitely had to have been shit from there. They didn't get playoff revenue, let alone fucking finals revenue. Considering how the value of the Magic as a franchise would likely tank as soon as the Diesel left town, it'd probably be a good business decision to spend that money, right? Right? Well, they didn't. And Shaq went to LA, and the rest is history. Kobe and Shaq arrived in Los Angeles at the same time in 1996. One an extremely young rookie, the other an established powerhouse. And together, they'd become, in my opinion at least, the best duo of all time, and for me, it's not particularly close. And I think what allowed them to be so dominant is how complementary their skill sets were. There have been other duos that featured 2 top 8 or so NBA players, but none of them fit as well together as Kobe and Shaq. Shaq was a dominant scoring force inside the paint, however, outside of the paint, he was useless. And late in games, teams would always elect to foul Shaq rather than let him bury his man under the rim. Luckily, Kobe was a perimeter player who happened to be clutch as hell. A guy you didn't want to send to the line, who could score from basically everywhere. So these two pretty much inherently make you pick your poison. Kobe and Shaq were not exactly Bill and Red though. They were far from the best buds from start to finish. In fact, their beef was the thing that cut their dynasty short, as after three-peating together, off-court issues would be their downfall. Seeing Shaq go to Miami, where he'd help Wade and the Heat win their first title, and Kobe would stick in LA for the remainder of his long, historic career, where he would get 2 championships in the almost dynasty Lakers, with Pau Gasol in Shaq's place as the complimentary big man. This compatibility and overwhelming talent of Kobe and Shaq overcame every obstacle on their way to their three-peat, going through some close series on their way to their first finals victory against the Pacers, but after that, there were not a lot of close series. On ring number 2, their only loss during the postseason was to Allen Iverson's Sixers in Game 1 of the finals, and ring number 3 saw them sweep Portland for the second straight season in round 1, gentlemen sweep a 58-win Spurs team, and escaping a let's say, controversial 7-game series versus the Kings, before sweeping the Nets in the finals. Frankly, you could probably do a pretty horrid job management-wise with these two and still end up getting a ring out of it. The level of greatness just working in harmony like this was all it took to go nearly overkill on winning championships, especially when they added decent role players here and there like Robert Horry, who, if you remember, dramatically increases your title odds. They're so great that people tend to love to speculate what they could have been if they never broke up. Again, you can watch our video about that in the link right here. But to summarize the part of it that's relevant to this video, the biggest problem getting in the way of that hypothetical being one full of even more rings for the Lakers was how they would have to get through The Spurs never made it to the finals for the entirety of their first 31 seasons in existence, if you are including their first 6 seasons in the ABA as the Dallas Chaparrals. In case you, like me, heard Dallas Chaparrals and immediately thought, what the fuck is a chaparral? Well, I decided to look it up, and according to Google, the team's founding owners, unable to agree on a name for the franchise during an early organizational meeting at the Sheraton Dallas Hotel, named it for the Chaparral Club in which they were meeting at. Anyways, this was despite having a history of winning plenty of regular season games, especially through the 90s, as their 7'1" Hall of Fame center David Robinson routinely carried them to 55 or more wins on the back of his extreme athleticism from the moment he started playing in 1989. San Antonio's only losing season in the entirety of the 90s was the 96-97 season, during which the Admiral missed virtually the whole year with an injury. This resulted in San Antonio having the 3rd worst record in the league with just 20 wins. But this ended up being a blessing in disguise. In the middle of that losing season, their team executive, who was in just his 3rd season on the job, fired the head coach and hired himself, Greg Popovich, who would go on to set the NBA record for career wins as a head coach. The Spurs also landed the #1 pick in the 1997 draft and picked up another big man to put next to their franchise center, a player who would go on to have a Hall of Fame career and often be dubbed as the greatest power forward of all time, Tim Duncan. In their first season together, the big three of Robinson, Duncan, and Popovich won 56 games before getting bounced in the second round by the Utah Jazz. Timmy won Rookie of the Year, made All-NBA First Team, and was 5th in MVP and Defensive Player of the Year voting. Putting up 21 points, 12 rebounds, and 3 stocks per game, David Robinson had nearly identical stats and award recognition. It wasn't until Duncan's 2nd season and the Spurs' 32nd year that they had an opportunity at a title in 1999. The NBA was having a lockout season, which made this one of the shortest seasons in NBA history, with there being only 50 regular season games. The Spurs won 37 of those 50, tied for the 2nd best record with the Jazz. In the playoffs, they'd go on to lose just 1 game on their path to the finals, including a sweep against a soon-to-be Dynasty Lakers team, where they would then beat Patrick Ewing's 8th-seeded Knicks in 5 games, with Duncan winning Finals MVP. After this initial title, the Spurs would only remain a contender for about the next 18 years or so. I'll repeat that with some more confidence so you have a second to comprehend this. The Spurs were a serious contender for 20 years, and that's not including the decade of dominance that David Robinson brought in the 90s. They won a championship in 1999, and they would not miss the playoffs until 2020. So if a baby was born When the Spurs won their first title, that baby would be old enough to drink by the time the Spurs missed the playoffs for the first time. Between the 2000 and 2017 seasons, the Spurs would win an average of 58 games a year, and they wouldn't win less than 50 a single time. Following ring number 1 of this dynasty, David Robinson began to decline. Meanwhile, the Lakers were three-peating from 2000 through 2002, and in 2003, David Robinson made it known that his 14th season would be his last, as he was entering his late 30s, and his athleticism was starting to drastically decline, leading to more frequent injuries. San Antonio sent the Admiral off with one more championship in 2003, beating the Nets in 6 games on the back of Tim Duncan pulling off the greatest carry job title run in modern NBA history, earning him his second Finals MVP. The end of Robinson's career marked the beginning of an era where the Spurs would win championships every other year, winning again in 2005 and 2007. They wouldn't appear in the finals again until 2013, where, after going up 3-2, they lost Game 6 in heartbreaking fashion, before eventually losing in 7 to LeBron and the Heatles in their second consecutive title, but San Antonio would end up meeting them again in 2014 and disrupting their dynasty by eliminating Miami in just 5 games while securing the record for the largest margin of victory in a final series ever. The two main supporting pieces to Tim Duncan on the floor for the last 3 rings were on the team for the 2003 run, but Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili were only 20 and 25 years old respectively, and each shot below 39% from the field in the finals. Also worth mentioning that while Manu was 25, he was a 25-year-old rookie. But by 2005, these two were the stars San Antonio needed to keep this dynasty alive, as they led their team in field goal percentage in the 05 finals while being the number 2 and number 3 scorers behind Timmy, who won his 3rd finals MVP. Tony Parker even won finals MVP in 2007, as the Cavs had no way of stopping him, and with the Big Three being pretty advanced in age by 2014, a 22-year-old from outside of this trio, Kawhi Leonard, became the 2nd youngest player to ever win finals MVP, just barely overtaking Tim Duncan's spot from 1999. Coach Pop, Tim, Tony, and Manu stuck together for what felt like forever, and Duncan actually took pay cuts to keep it that way, giving Pop the flexibility to add solid role players to fill in the roster. Together, they built a system around a pass-first, team-oriented approach, where every player was expected to forego a good shot in favor of making the extra pass to create a great one. The beautiful game Spurs are still to this day one of the most well-regarded championship teams amongst NBA fans. 5 championships in 16 years might not sound totally insane at first, but the sheer dominance over the regular season and continuity of this team's success without falter makes them one of the most slept on dynasties ever. They're like literally slept on. People find them boring. One lesson from the Spurs is really more of a lesson to learn from Tim Duncan. Just having him be the guy that he is made the Spurs capable of checking off a few extra boxes that ordinarily would not come from just one individual player. Timmy's selfless, quiet dominance set the tone for the Spurs dynasty in tandem with Pop's coaching style. Not only did his pay cuts enable continuity and depth, but his game emphasized the team-first approach to their ever-changing systems. A superstar that checks their ego at the door can bring a level of value to your team that is nearly impossible to measure. But the most sustainable lesson from the Spurs is about the diversity in the X's and O's. The Spurs dynasty is the perfect example of how far being adaptable can take a team. The 99 run looked way different than the 03 run, going from the duo of Robinson and Duncan to just Tim backpacking the whole damn team. The 05 and 07 titles are more similar to each other than any other 2 of their 5, but the shift in playstyle from being peak performance within the status quo of normal NBA basketball to being egalitarian game changers who were kind of way ahead of their time in 2014 is something that I'm not even sure can be duplicated again. at least not in my lifetime. San Antonio's innovation opened up the door for the next dynasty to hone in on the power of the three and the subsequent revolution that happened with it.
They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry.
Okay, whoa. Let's take a pause here. I don't think we need that. I have talked about this team 2 separate times in the last 5 videos in depth. I don't think we need another mix. God fucking knows I don't want to edit one. I've talked about this team a lot, as they kind of force you to, so I'm gonna try to keep this segment short and sweet. Especially because I think most of you all watching this probably have a decent memory of the Warriors dynasty, considering their most recent title was in 2022. You probably already know that Golden State made it to the finals for 5 straight seasons and won 3 of those titles. How they met LeBron and the Cavaliers every time before Kawhi Leonard and the Raptors beat them in 2019. How their only other final series loss came from blowing a 3-1 lead in 2016 following a record-setting 73-win season. How Kevin Durant shocked the world and signed on right after that, won 2 titles, left, and then the Dubs won their 4th ring in 2022 just for the hell of it. You probably already know how their coaching schemes and Stephen Curry's play style changed the entire landscape of the NBA as we know it. So instead of going over all that in depth for the 3rd time in the last year, let's just skip right to the lessons. The first one is, while we got this lesson a bit with the 80s Celtics and Lakers, it is especially fair to say that the Golden State Warriors had the perfect big 3 in terms of its composition. Stephen Curry was the on-ball creator, also an off-ball threat, of course, really the best one at that, but he is the guy with the ball when the game is on the line, is the point. Klay Thompson was a remarkable off-ball player who shot the lights out and played good defense, and Draymond was primarily a defensive anchor, but then on offense he was more or less a connector, setting suspiciously effective screens and making the right passes to their shooters. There was no conflict. The only skill sets that overlapped were ones that complemented each other as a result. Like Steph and Klay both being great shooters. I don't even think we shouldn't say great. We should say, like, Steph and Klay both being all-time great shooters and off-ball players, Draymond and Steph both being great playmakers, and Draymond and Klay both being good to great defenders, didn't get in the way of anyone's game. They only made each other more whole.
You mean one is a great defense?
Yeah, I like more whole better, but...
Me too. I know you like more whole.
Who doesn't like more whole? They only made each other better. Now, the last obvious lesson here comes from Steve Kerr. While there are plenty of things you can scrutinize Kerr for, especially in recent history, in terms of his early days in Golden State, I do not think he could have stuck the landing any harder if he tried. Sure, part of that was weird luck. David Lee's injury resulted in Draymond starting, which was not something that was 100% in Kerr's control. Neither was inheriting Stephen motherfucking Curry, who also happened to be on a crazy cheap contract because of previous injuries as well. But he did what most coaches don't. He was open to new possibilities and approaches within the game. There are a lot of ways to skin a cat. But when it comes to basketball coaches, it is common for them to be insistent that there is only one way to skin a cat. And if you do not skin this cat in this particular way, well, then you just have to be doing it wrong. So now that you're all caught up on dynasties, if you're watching this shortly after the 2024 finals, you may have noticed that there has not been a repeat champion in the last 6 seasons. This actually marks the 2nd longest streak of its kind in NBA history, tying the 6-year streak where the Spurs were winning it every other year, so it doesn't even really count like that. This parity from the NBA in the 2020s thus far feels unique. Like the tides are really changing, and the championship is more up for grabs than ever each season. But this actually isn't the case. There's one other era where the NBA was already like this, and it's the only other streak of non-repeat champions longer than the one we are living in right now. An era which, in my experience, people tend to kind of forget about.
On the line. Oh, got it in! Bill Walton got it in! Portugal Gross. What a sequence for the Blazers! Walton again! Twice in the basket! I can't believe that.
The 1970s were such a weird, disjointed era full of so many weird-ass teams, with a lot of players whose names have mostly disappeared from the modern discourse entirely. Which is odd because we talk about 60s players pretty often even still. But the 70s? Like, sometimes people talk about Kareem and Oscar in 1971, or Bill Walton's Blazers in 1977, but other than that, I didn't know shit about this era for a very long time. And it's for the exact reason that we have already established. When you sum up the 80s, you say Magic and Bird. When you sum up the 90s, you say Jordan, and so on. What the hell do you say about the 70s? Kareem was great. Like, there's never been a larger gap between the best player and the second best player in the league levels of great. But also, he only won one championship in this era. Was this all just about the NBA versus the ABA? I don't know. Do y'all have any suggestions? Because I am stumped. This era does not have a basic rough summary that you can get down in one sentence. You have to go year by year with this shit to really understand it. So, I'm just gonna quickly speed run the history of championship teams in the 1970s. In 1970 and later 1973, the New York Knicks won their first and only championships in franchise history, primarily due to the duo of Clyde Drexler and Willis Reed. This was a tough defense with two versatile scorers and passers, pretty ahead of their time, honestly. In the 1970 offseason, the Milwaukee Bucks acquired Oscar Robertson, and he and Kareem, again the best player in the league by a mile at this time, would run through the Western Conference. Yeah, the Bucks were in the Western Conference in 1971. What about it? And they would sweep the Bullets in the finals. In 1972, Jerry West finally would win his first and only ring after 7 losses in a row in the NBA Finals. In 74 and 76, John Havlicek, who was a key star alongside Bill Russell in the later half of Boston's stranglehold on the 60s, was now the team's best player, with the team also having JoJo White, a talented scoring point guard, and Dave Cowens, a 20 and 15 big man. John wasn't as good in 76, but Cowens and JoJo managed to step up, with JoJo even winning Finals MVP that year. 75 was actually a strange season within this era of, for the most part, fairly deep and well-constructed rosters winning it all. But in the case of the 75 Dubs, this was all Rick Barry. The Warriors won just 48 games in the regular season, but Rick didn't care. He would average about 28 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, and 4 stocks on good efficiency, at least for this era, only having 2 teammates averaging double-digit points, Jamal Wilkes with 15 and Charles Johnson with 12. The 77 Blazers are, of course, the Walton team, but he also had another star big man next to him in the front court, as well as a star guard in Lionel Hollins. The best thing about this team to me was their defense and their assist distribution. They got the most steals and second most blocks of the 77 playoffs, and on offense, everybody could pass. Most people could score, so everybody was collectively looking for the best shot. 4 starters averaged 4 or more assists. In 78, the Washington Bullets won. This is another, what the fuck title. Their big three of Elvin Hayes, Wes Unseld, and Bob Dandridge, who played a key role on the 71 Bucks as well, won just 44 regular season games. 44. How do you win a title after being just 3 games over 500? I don't get it. When you look at their playoff stats, not only do they not really lead in anything, they're often not even top 5. They were the second best offensive rebounding team. That was it. Otherwise, average to even below average in every other aspect of playoff basketball. But they still won the title. And the last 70s team is actually my favorite here. The 1979 Seattle Supersonics were led by their star backcourt of Dennis Johnson and Gus Williams, two dynamic scoring and passing guards, as well as center Jack Sikma, who is a double-double machine. They also had a point forward named John Johnson, who I promise I'm not making up, who was a 12-point scorer who would grab 7 rebounds and 5 assists as well. This was a better regular season team than many others that won a championship in this era, but they reached another level in the playoffs. In particular, their backcourt stepped up and then some. Gus and Dennis combined to average 35 points per game in the regular season, but that would jump to 48 in the postseason. Okay, so that was my time. Try and beat it, I guess. Anyways, it feels impossible not to notice the sheer variety of champions in this era. That's insanely unique. There's really no other era where there are no repeat champions and only 2 teams would win 2 within this era. This was also the first championship for several of these franchises in the 70s. The Knicks, Bucks, Blazers, Bullets, and Sonics all got their first titles. For some of them, their only titles. The Minneapolis Lakers and Philadelphia Warriors had won championships prior, but this was the first time the Golden State Warriors and the Los Angeles Lakers would win a chip. The Boston Celtics also won 2 titles in this decade, easily the most under-discussed rings in their overall collection. Straight up, when do people talk about these Celtics teams? Like, ever? They had the same core players, they won 2 in 3 years, but no, it's just the 2008 team, the Bird teams, and the Russell teams. However, aside from them, this era was owned by new teams who had never had the spotlight before, or at the very least hadn't had it in a very long time from a very different place. Now, does that not sound pretty similar to the last few seasons? Again, 2024 marks the 6th straight championship from a different team. Not only has there not been a back-to-back, there hasn't even been a team that's won 2 out of the last 6 like the Celtics or Knicks did in the 70s. It's a different team every year, no repeats. The Raptors won their first title, as did the Denver Nuggets. The Bucks won their first since the only one that they won in the 70s, aka 50 years ago. The Lakers are obviously still the Lakers, the franchise, but this was an entirely different core from their last title after years of struggle. And in the case of the Dubs, I'd say that they're kind of the 70s Celtics in this equation, a dynasty of the past squeezing yet another ring in with many of its core players from the previous dynasty. Either way, you can't summarize the 2020s in a single sentence so far. Not in the way that you could in the 2010s or the 2000s or the 90s or the 80s or the 60s. And this is the exact PR issue that the 1970s have, which leads to them just never being discussed. Which does then bring up the question, are the 2020s doomed to be a mostly forgotten era due to this lack of continuity? Well, a large part of this is the context of the era. The NBA was not nearly as big of an organization as it is today, and the league had a competitor that was taking a lot of the talent away that could have been in the NBA. There also was just a general lack of superstars in this era. No one came close to competing with Kareem for the top spot. It's really not even all that clear who the top players of the era really even were. As a result, lots of teams would win with depth and a team-oriented approach. In today's league, there is no short supply of superstar level talents, but at the same time, the players lower on the totem pole have gotten much better and much more impactful. I don't necessarily think the top 5 players in 2024 are just leaps and bounds better than the top 5 players in 1990. But I absolutely think players ranked 20 through 100 are significantly better. With the talent no longer as top-heavy in the NBA, superstars don't decide series the way that they used to in recent memory. So we are back to needing more of a team-oriented approach, one that just so happens to have superstars in the mix. The approaches to team building are becoming reminiscent of the 70s and less like the 90s or 2000s when you could rely on mostly one superstar to carry a roster of dudes who wouldn't even be in the league today. After LeBron burst the dam of free agency by going to the Heat, the ensuing flood of franchises making short-term investments into big-name players washed away as quickly as it came. Now, a decade since LeBron returned to the Cavs, the approach to team building is back to being more like how it was in the 70s, where teams lean more towards long-term investment in a core. The volatility of free agency and major trades seems to be becoming unattractive to front offices. Teams would rather take the slow and steady approach. But unlike the 70s, the NBA is now a multi-billion-dollar brand, and the presence of the NBA on social media alone far outmatches pro basketball's relevance in 1970s America. At the same time, there is a pull for dynasties in their moment, not just in retrospect, and in recent years, the NBA has seen a general downward trend in viewership during the finals. The KD Warriors that everybody hated so much? Yeah, they easily got more eyes on them in 2018 and 2019 than those that came afterwards, getting 17.5 and 15 million viewers on average per game. Since then, the bubble kind of tanked it because it was too woke. Am I right, mouth breathers? And in 2021, 2022, and 2023, the average finals viewership was 11.3 million views a game. Quite the drop-off. So is it that the casual fan struggles to stay connected to the league with this level of unpredictability? And continuity is king? Are headlining superstars like Jordan, powerful combinations like Kobe and Shaq, or long-lasting rivalries like Magic versus Bird and LeBron versus Steph just a better selling point than a merely competitive league, regardless of how loaded the talent pool is? But let's not try to think about economics too hard today or where most of my hair went, and let's move on to teams past the 70s that have a relevant lesson to offer us. The teams that managed to steal a title or two without having a dominant run for years and years. Those, for the most part, diamonds in the rough that took full advantage in the right moment. I say for the most part because there are some examples of teams that had the juice to be a dynasty but didn't end up sustaining their dominance enough to collect more than 2 rings, like the Big 3 Miami Heat and 08 Celtics in recent years, and throwbacks like the 83 Sixers, the mid-90s Rockets, and the bad boy Pistons. Which, by the way, the Pistons were actually robbed of a three-peat, but that's just one YouTuber's opinion. But aside from these, every other non-dynasty title is almost universally a product of great roster construction, management, and coaching, along with a core of players who all buy in, understand their role, and play it to near perfection. We saw with the old Celtics that while they had a defensive superstar in Bill Russell, they would beat offensive superstars like Wilt Chamberlain with relative ease despite Russell's offensive shortcomings. But believe it or not, Wilt actually did get one over on the Celtics in 1967, and this single anomaly in the Wilt versus Bill rivalry actually has a very important lesson to offer. It honestly might be important enough for its own deep dive, but regardless, my main point is, I really do not think that big numbers are conducive to winning NBA championships. Generally, crazy numbers are indicative of a poor, uneven roster construction. That's why people thought Jordan Poole would average 30 as soon as he arrived in Washington. In all of NBA history, a player has averaged 35 or more points per game in a season 10 times, with half of those seasons belonging to Wilt. Only 3 of those players would even make it to the finals, all 3 would lose, and they're all from the frickin' 60s, the era of inflated stats. Elgin Baylor in 62, Wilt in 65, and Rick Barry in 67, who actually lost to Wilt after Chamberlain got past Bill Russell in the conference finals. Besides that, only one of those 10 seasons made the conference finals, that being Wilt in his 50-point-per-game season. After that, all but one season ended in the second or first round, and in the sole remaining case of Wilt in 1963, when he averaged 44.8 points per game, the San Francisco Warriors didn't even make the playoffs. Yeah. And as for assists, in all of NBA history, players have averaged 13 or more assists per game in a season just 8 times. John Stockton has 5 of those 8 seasons, and in each one in order, the Jazz lost in the second round, got swept in the first round, lost in the first round, got gentlemen swept in the second round, and lost in the conference finals. As for the other 3 seasons, those belong to Kevin Porter in 1979, Magic Johnson did it in 1984, and Isaiah Thomas did it in 1985. For Porter, his Detroit Pistons would miss the playoffs. For Thomas, his Detroit Pistons would lose in the second round 6 years later. And for Magic, he lost in Game 7 of the finals to the Celtics, which ain't too bad, but as I mentioned earlier, Magic is the exception when it comes to this rule. But speaking of exceptions, how exactly does this all tie back to Wilt Chamberlain finally besting the Celtics in 1967? Wilt had found middling playoff success in the first 7 years of his career, ranging from losing in the finals to not even making the playoffs, all of this despite him averaging 39 points per game with some of the best efficiency in the league. Wilt was easily the best scorer on his team every time, both from a production and efficiency standpoint. Nobody averaged a higher field goal percentage than him on either of his teams. So it only makes sense that you would feed Wilt the ball as much as possible, right? Well, no. As it turns out, the best version of a Wilt Chamberlain team is one where he shoots the ball less, playmakes more, and puts more of his energy into the defensive side of the floor. As it turns out, the best version of a Wilt-led team is one where he shoots the ball less, playmakes more, and focuses more of his energy on defense. This coaching change in the offseason of '66 was really the only significant difference between the '67 championship team and the one from the year prior, where Wilt averaged 34 points, but the Sixers lost in the conference finals to guess who. Otherwise, Wilt's teammates were basically the same. Except they weren't. Not really. Billy Cunningham got 3 more shots per game, Chet Walker and Wally Jones each got 2 more shots per game, and all 3 players saw their averages increase by 4 points a game, with all 3 having a 3 to 6% increase in their field goal percentage. Meanwhile, Wilt only ranked 3rd on the team in field goal attempts, cutting the tougher ones out of his shot diet, and as a result, his efficiency in scoring skyrocketed to a then career-high 68% shooting from the field. Dude was still averaging 24 points per game, by the way. 24 on 68% shooting is nuts, man. On top of that, he led his team in assists and had the best defensive season of his career. All of this culminated in Wilt finally beating Russell, doing so in a gentleman's sweep and then winning a title following that. During the regular season, that team won 68 out of 81 games, giving them the highest win percentage in NBA history at the time, a record only to be broken by Wilt again, this time with the Lakers in 1973, a record that would stand for like 25 years. Wilt epitomized what seemed to be a law of NBA basketball on both ends of the spectrum. When you put up crazy big numbers, that almost inherently comes from an over-reliance on one individual. A lot of the times, guys who did put up big numbers and still managed to be champions ended up needing to dial it back in order to achieve that. If you don't love this Wilt Chamberlain example, which, fuck you, it's pretty good, but if you don't, let's take Michael Jordan for instance. Following his rookie season, MJ averaged 36.3 points per game over 49 playoff games prior to his title runs. Afterwards, through all of his championship campaigns, plus 1995, he averaged 32.5 points per game over 126 games. Not a crazy reduction, but a noticeable one nonetheless. But let's look at some non-dynasties from recent NBA history to get further lessons from. The 2004 Pistons were probably the most team in NBA history to win a title, and they were genuinely just a great defense with 5 starters who could all finish plays and make good reads. No one had super impressive numbers, but they managed to beat the greatest duo of all time in the finals regardless. The 2006 Heat demonstrated that principle I mentioned earlier about building a contender around a young superstar as quickly as possible. Miami got Shaq basically as soon as they realized Dwayne Wade was that dude, and they won a title because of it. The 2011 Mavericks could be a cautionary tale about not underestimating your opponent or how much adjustments over a 7-game series can swing things. The 2016 Cavaliers demonstrated the importance of perseverance. I don't know what could be a greater example of that than a 3-1 finals comeback. The 2019 Raptors were another deep-ass defensive team surrounding a clutch superstar, and maybe one of the best examples of how an appropriately aggressive and aspirational front office can be the difference between being a good team and a great one. The 2021 Bucks brought back hard-nosed physicality, and well, I guess poor spacing. The 2023 Nuggets and even the 2020 Lakers reinforced the perimeter player big man being the best duo theory that we discussed with Kobe and Shaq. They both also really demonstrated the importance of high-value role players in the 2020s. And the Boston Celtics, as of a few weeks ago, really demonstrated that importance more so than any other champion of the era, as the C's brought back their egalitarian approach of the past, allowing their depth to prevail over an extremely top-heavy Mavericks team. The Celtics were such a well-rounded, team-oriented roster that their best player didn't even end up winning Finals MVP. In fact, if you look back at the title teams of the 2020s, there's never been more of a question as to whether or not the team's best player was actually their best player. LeBron versus AD in 2020 is as close as it got previous. Boston didn't have the best player in the series, but they had the best team in the series, and that's what really mattered at the end of the day. This parity from the NBA in the 2020s thus far feels unique. Like the tides are really changing, and the championship is more up for grabs than ever each season. Now that we've basically deep dived dynasties and then some, what have we learned? There are so many different ways to win a championship, so many factors that go into winning a championship. That is where I think you find the beauty in the game, at least I do. To an extent, the reason this video took so much time and turned out the way that it did was because we realized that we were trying to learn something that was basically unknowable. If you're watching the extended cut of this video, then you'll remember this from chapter 1. But when we first started this video, it was about how to win an NBA championship. We started by guessing the top 10 commandments for winning an NBA title, but quickly realized this was an exercise in futility. If how to win a championship in 10 steps was simple enough for us to figure out, then everyone would be doing it. Seriously, the approach would be more universal if it were that easy to figure out, but in reality, every team, hell, every person's top 10 list could be different in some way or another. Even within the same organization, we've seen time and time again how having management at all levels being on the same page, from the front office to the coaching staff, pays off in a major way. Brad Auerbach and Greg Popovich literally did double duty as both. Jerry Krause always made sure he hired coaches who saw his vision, as even before his first head coaching hire, he brought on an old college friend to be an assistant who just so happened to invent the triangle offense, Tex Winter. Even the 2024 Celtics have their former head coach Brad Stevens working as their executive in perfect harmony with their coaching staff's philosophies, something that he's demonstrated he's extremely qualified for, even more so than he was at coaching in the NBA. That foundation of management, which was a massive chunk of the everything but basketball part of Chapter 1, proved to be as significant as expected. However, the element of ideological consistency, the philosophical harmony of everyone involved in the process, was notably underestimated. So what about the other things in this stupid list? Well, management and coaching and all that doesn't just need to be on the same page, it needs to be on a good page, a championship page. They need to have good ideas. And in the modern NBA, the best organizations' ideas bank on the intersection of these good philosophies from management and their roster's depth and playmaking. Let's talk about capital D depth, because the first thing that stood out to me examining this streak of titles in the 2020s was the role players. Honestly, they're starting to get so good that even describing them as role players feels like a bit of a disservice. But this is the reality of the current NBA today. You can be not even a top 50 player in the league, but still impactful enough to swing a playoff series. Brandon Clark all but single-handedly eliminated the Wolves in round 1 over the last 2 games for the 2022 Grizzlies off of the bench while their starter was in foul trouble. And what percentage of you guys even know who that is? Rudy forced me to put this in the script, just so you know. What about Fred VanVleet? His last 3 games of the conference finals versus the Bucks was the reason they won the series. Fred was bad, like bad, in the first half of the playoffs, but after his first child was born in the middle of it, he donned the nickname Father Fred, and for the final 9 games of the postseason, he averaged 15 points, shooting at 53% from 3 on 6 attempts per game. This was almost impossible in the past eras of NBA history, especially in the 90s, 2000s, and most of the 2010s. The 80s still had some remnants of the 70s lurking in the shadows of next-gen superstars, and it feels like we're seeing a sort of inverted version of that development today. Rather than exiting an era of depth and becoming superstar-focused, the current NBA is emerging from that age dominated by Goliaths into one ripe with surprisingly strong Davids, all while talking heads on TV are trying to figure out who the next face of the league is. In the age of the Dynasty, once you got past the top 2 to 3 stars, those lesser known players' relevance to the outcome of the games dwindled dramatically. Not anymore though. Let's just look at the 4th and 5th best starters as well as the 6th men for the title teams during their playoff runs of 2019 through 2024, and then compare them to those of the pre-Beautiful Game Spurs and the Jordan Bulls. I wrote out my whole thought process about why I picked these teams specifically. It's long as hell, so if you want to read it, here it is, but it's convoluted, it makes sense. Moving on. I put together the best possible lineup with every player that fits this criteria, and this is what it looks like. Team 2 would have the best player in Manu Ginobili, but other than that, they are getting washed by Team 1. And mind you, this is with the 2000 Spurs and 90s Bulls players having the advantage of being pulled from 10 rosters instead of 6. Depth matters so much. Far more than it ever did before, especially in recent NBA history. The only other era where this is applicable is the 1970s. Yes, Bill and Red's teams were very deep, however, this was back when there were 9 NBA teams, and you know, Russell was still a 5-time MVP at the end of the day. In the 80s, Magic and Bird were the best players in the league, even if they did have deep rosters. But in the 70s, shit was random as hell, and it was the teams with depth that were winning it all. There's literally only one title in that era that you can say came from a team that was not deep, that being the Rick Barry-led Warriors, but that's it. Otherwise, it's generally one star/superstar, or perhaps a pair of stars and then a litany of great role players, kind of just like it is today. The parity era that we are in now is so similar to the 70s. And because of that, I truly failed to properly assess how much depth matters today. The 70s are an era that I already admitted was my biggest blind spot in my perspective on the NBA prior to making this video. Now I have a whole new respect for teams' 3rd through 6th best players. So much so that I feel pretty strongly that they matter more than your traditional clutch superstar in many ways. Talent is so abundant around the league that it comes down to the pieces around a superstar. Of course you need a leader, that's a given, but they don't need to be a Kobe or Jordan type. It can be Jason Tatum shooting poorly, letting Jaylen Brown win Finals MVP, and Derek White and Kristaps Porzingis making the series basically uncompetitive, which leads us to the next biggest differences, which are, as mentioned earlier, playmaking and philosophy, which was the runner-up for how we would rename this channel. If you've ever heard me talk for more than maybe 3 minutes, you've probably heard me make this point before. But playmaking doesn't simply mean passing and getting assists. So much of what you can do before an assist influences how you can make a play. And the degree of influence you have on the creation of the play goes far beyond merely your ability to pass the ball. And I also mentioned in chapter 1 how playmaking needs to be abundant, whether it be through a team approach or a Magic Johnson level solo playmaking hub. But unless your best player's name is Magic, LeBron, Jokic, and maybe someday Luka, if you put all of your eggs in one basket in the playmaking department, well, you're gonna end up with a basket full of yolks and crushed shells. Or worse, an embarrassing loss in Game 5 of the 2024 Finals. The Celtics, in their 2024 run, similar to their 60s counterparts, had an egalitarian approach to offense. Everybody playmakes and scores, making it impossible for the defense to ignore any one player that Boston had on the floor. Meanwhile, for Dallas, Luka was doing all of the playmaking. Every shot, whether he was taking it or his teammates were, came down to his influence. Lots of people criticized Tatum for being able to just disappear from big games and still end up winning in the end. He certainly did that for large portions of this final series. But that's the reality of having a championship roster. In the most ideal world, if you want to build a team that can truly overcome all obstacles, then having one that can survive a bad performance from your superstar, well, that's about as good as it gets. Different teams have different top 10 lists, right? Well, Boston just had a way better one. And that came down to roster construction, the philosophy they had with their approach to the game, and most importantly, their approach to playmaking. As a result, the 2024 Finals matchup ended up looking like a team versus a player. We've used the David and Goliath metaphor a couple of times already, usually referring to the Goliath as the winner most of the time, but in this case, Luka was the Goliath, that superstar with a clutch gene and a bulk of his team's playmaking duties. I mean, they call it Luka Magic for a reason. And most TV analysts picked the Mavericks to win the series. He couldn't beat a team of Super Davids all on his own. Luka and Kyrie were supposed to be the best first and second options in this final series, but it ended up being guys 3 through 6 who swung it in Boston's favor. Like, even if Kyrie wasn't crazy cold and Luka wasn't hurt, this Celtics team had still been one of the most dominant teams all season, all while the Mavericks had been good since March. This is kind of like the Celtics of the 60s. We mentioned before how they had insane scoring and assist distribution. They had 5 to 7 double-digit scores in every title run they had. That's insane for most NBA teams to try and achieve. But Boston did exactly that this year, having 5 players average double digits throughout the playoffs, nearly 6 as Al Horford averaged 9.2. To me, Luka probably felt like Jerry West did in the finals versus Boston. In 1969, Jerry averaged 38 and 7 versus the Celtics, and he lost. The Lakers asked him to do too much, just as Dallas did with Luka. There are limitations on what one individual is capable of, no matter how good that individual is. And that only becomes more true as the lower tier players begin to matter more and more. In both cases, Boston had a better playbook and everybody was on the same page. These teams shouldered a mutually beneficial share of their responsibilities, with each part being positioned to make their winning machine work as optimally as possible. The value of that synergy is harder to quantify than whatever ends up on some ranked list of basketball isms. If I were to look at these two Celtics teams, especially for Bill and Red's teams, how the hell am I supposed to quantify the power of friendship? So, futile or not, if I were to rearrange these dumb little commandments into an actual usable list for strictly the modern NBA, then this is what it would look like. Numbers 7, 9, and 10 eventually were eliminated because at this time they were just too granular or reductive. Depth went from 6th to 3rd, switching places with clutch superstars, with luck bumped up to number 4 in the process, while ranked 5th is the combination of playmaking abundance and a dependable offensive system, with the only thing staying the same being spots 1 and 2, everything but basketball, and defense wins championships, kinda. But again, the original premise of this video, how to win a championship, was broken from the start. It's a worthy thought experiment. We loved making this long-ass video, but we're not quite dumb enough to think that we can actually crack the code from our apartment bedroom office. Maybe in a way, that's why we were willing to open up the conversation with a semi-silly segment that can be a little reductive, sure, but it got the message across, at least hopefully. The problem with simplified hierarchical thinking is that it creates interference with more layered, detailed, true ideas. Making a top 10 list is an easy way to avoid nuance and fall into mind traps that keep you from having better ideas than the one you just so happen to already have. It's a recipe for failing to better yourself in any consequential way. That's why as the process of making this video went along, the premise of the video itself started to feel fundamentally flawed and futile, especially considering the current, super fluid, ever-changing state of the NBA. It started to feel pointless to try and calculate how relevant rebound totals and assist-to-turnover ratios are to championships because they didn't feel like they'd be all that fruitful to a worthwhile conversation. But another surprisingly intriguing conversation had popped up in the usually desolate hellscape of NBA Dorkland discourse, and luckily for our sake on this channel, it was pretty relevant to our original flawed premise. Nearly everybody in a bipartisan way walked away from the most recent finals coming to the same conclusion, that they were just so boring. And it's not even just 2024, though there was a big spike in complaints after this year's run specifically. In the 2020s in general, people just are not vibing with the NBA Finals. And while there is a lot about the game that I love more now than I ever have before, I do not blame these fans for wanting something different, something familiar. And where you frequently find that kind of familiarity is with dynasties. Back when KD joined the Warriors, there were many complaints about how this decision ruined the league. So much so that many suggested the league step in and block it in some way, despite them having no power to do so. But at least from the engagement/financial perspective, the NBA was doing great. Finals viewership was phenomenal. But then Kevin Durant left Golden State, and well, the numbers speak for themselves. NBA freaks who don't touch grass have been asking for a league with parity for years. Nobody was referencing the 70s while doing it though, because it was, after all, the dark fucking period. But just like in the 70s, people aren't really tuning in, and there's no ABA to compete with either. Just a million other things to watch on Diz Cast Amount Plus. What the typical NBA fan wants and what the die-hard dork like myself want seems to be pretty different. I think where the dissonance exists between these perspectives is in a love versus money type of way. On one hand, if you're a hardcore NBA fan like I am, as I'm sure most of you who've made it this far in the video are, which thank you by the way, then this era of parity is actually pretty sick, right? Sure, the conference finals and final series in 2024 were not all that exciting. When it comes to the actual fan experience, personally, I'm enjoying not really knowing who will win the championship. I've gotten the prediction for the championship before the playoffs wrong every single time since the Raptors pulled off their historic playoff run. That's fun to me because I have been paying attention to most teams in the NBA to begin with, so more of those teams being in the title conversation is inherently more interesting to me. I feel a lot better watching the 5th seed in the West during the regular season, knowing that it is possible that that team can go all the way to the NBA Finals. However, if you're a casual NBA fan, which is not derogatory, and you don't have time to keep tabs with the Thunder, Mavericks, Nuggets, Timberwolves, Clippers, Celtics, Bucks, Pacers, Sixers, and Knicks, then when you get around to the playoffs, shit just gets confusing. Like, imagine you're trying to introduce a friend to basketball in 2025. They're a real casual to the extreme. They know a couple of players' names and what their general play style looks like. If you wanted to take this person through a time machine and introduce them through one NBA postseason, would you do that in 2016 or 2024? Because in 2016, you can just go, it's Steph versus LeBron, dog. Like, sure, there's more nuances to it, but that's essentially it. But in 2024, you have to talk to him about matchups, about the importance of coaching, about the impact of shooting variants, how much more role players matter now, the nuances, the finer details, the nitty-gritty, all that stuff that bores the hell out of a casual fan. Like, all that shit's fun to me. But is it fun to fucking Gary? So we have ourselves a bit of a paradoxical situation here, where ironically, the worse the basketball is, the better the product is. It's a bit unfortunate, but more often than not, the more simplistic something is, the more mass appeal it's going to have. This is quite a tough spot to be in if you're an NBA-affiliated media corporation whose whole shtick is infinite growth and maximizing your reach. The NBA media's reaction to these last couple of years has been an unfocused scramble. Have you seen these guys lately? Have you seen what they're choosing to talk about leading into the finals? It's extremely embarrassing. Goddamn, have some shame, please. Like, it's kind of pathetic. And given that so many casuals depend on these brief moments of the broadcast where they hold the public's attention hostage as they wait for what's supposed to be the highest stakes basketball of the year, kills lots of potential love for the sport. The discourse, the stories, the numbers, the rivalries, anything that people actually find compelling enough to connect to the game is dead on arrival. They're doing the what does this mean for LeBron's legacy shit, but unironically. And the pure presentation of things just, I'm sorry, but fuck this shit, dude. There have been a lot of tweets about the aesthetic of the NBA Finals, this most recent 2024 postseason more than ever. Even this guy, who I believe's YouTube channel is called Also Rusty Buckets, had this to say. First of all, the presentation is fucking terrible. If I see one more goddamn YouTube TV logo, I swear to God, I get it. It's on YouTube TV. I'm watching it on YouTube TV. I know. Fuck off. The NBA has almost always been a global scale business designed to milk as many dollars out of their cash cow as possible. This was true from the start at a smaller scale, as many refer to the pre-80s NBA as a mom and pop league. But since then, the league has gone corporate, and that only seems to be getting even more true with time. This is a reality that we have to accept. Mega corporation, gonna mega corporation. But man, it really feels like you're getting hit over the head with advertisements lately. What's next? Are NBA jerseys just gonna start looking like NASCAR jerseys, uniforms, outfits? whatever. For me, an under-discussed Pandora's box on this matter was when jersey sponsors came to the NBA. Maybe that will get a deep dive of its own one day. But aesthetic complaints aside, it's all a part of the bigger picture here. People tend to look at the value of the league and the fact that players are making more money than ever as proof of success, not just from a financial perspective, but also from a cultural one as well. But no. In reality, the NBA is doing better now than ever as a business, but it is coming at the expense of the quality of their product. And the masses won't keep consuming a bad product in good faith for too long before they lose their trust, especially with how many entertainment options are out there. It might feel like a reach at first, but a comparison you could make is to Call of Duty. COD has been getting inarguably worse with just about every release for years now. Meanwhile, their profitability has been soaring because they figured out how they could suck every last drop from their microtransaction milkers. They just kept breaking records for revenue with each new game until they didn't. Modern Warfare 3, the second one, saw a 25% dip in sales from Modern Warfare 2 to Ballerina Warfare. You can see this in the NBA's video game too. 2K, in their pursuit to overtake NBA Live as the cultural staple basketball game, churned out what felt like an authentic product made with passion, and it got the success it was shooting for. But at a certain point of popularity, after crushing the competition, they're able to just remake the same game over and over again while sucking hard as hell on that microtransaction nip. But the cultural relevance is dying. NBA 2K23 sold 11 million units, 2K24 sold just 7 million, and I dare you to look up your favorite childhood 2K YouTuber's channel right now. I bet it's not doing that well. People can only take so much. You can worsen your product for the sake of monetizing it as effectively as possible, but eventually that overt, unapologetic greed will turn people off, and you will lose the audience that got you that fundamental financial success in the first place. The NBA has always been a product, but you can't create a product without love and passion and expect it to come out beautiful. But bringing this back to real-life games, getting hit over the head with ads while watching the 2024 finals wasn't a good viewership experience. And to make matters worse, you also got commentary that frankly didn't feel appreciative of the weight of the moment. Again, we're talking about a lack of passion here. To be fair to Doris, JJ, and Mike Breen, they weren't given much to work with this year. But in general, in sports media, you aren't seeing things like this.
Well, for Bulls fans, there is, of course, cause for celebration tonight after a sixth championship that came harder than the others. But there's some anxiousness mixed in as well. Who knows how all of this will play out, but it's certainly possible that tonight we saw the last of the Chicago Bulls as we have known them. And whether it ends here or sometime in the near future, it'll be noteworthy not just for the breakup of one of the great teams in sports history, but because given the present structure of pro sports, it may be quite a while before we see anything like this again. Oh, the organizations that have the resources, the Yankees, the Braves, the Cowboys, the Lakers, and the NBA, will almost always field contending teams, but the days of continuity may be ending. Even on the best teams, there's now so much turnover that it's becoming ever harder to follow and identify with teams. Loyalty has been fragmented, which brings us to an underappreciated aspect of this golden era in the NBA.
Now, this romanticization definitely lacks some particular nuances, but I'll take the problems of theatrical entertainment over an objective, boring, soulless breakdown of a matchup. This is an entertainment product, so by all means necessary, for the love of basketball, please entertain. It goes beyond basketball. It's absolutely fundamental to the enjoyment of the sport that the presentation is done well in a way that connects the audience to these stories of these amazing athletes and their journeys. But it's seemingly harder and harder to find that now, despite there being more voices than ever. And a large portion of the blame for that falls on the mainstream sports media, the broadcast partners. Instead of giving the audience some fodder to feel the gravity of the moment, we have to talk about LeBron unfollowing Kendrick Perkins on Instagram. Who fucking cares? cares?
Shut up! Please shut up! Stop. Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
I understand if you are an overly invested fan like myself and you look at stuff like this and say, man, fuck those casuals. I'm here for hoops. If you need a silly little narrative to watch the game, then I say good riddance. Look, I get it. I've held that perspective in some ways before, but the reality is there would be no NBA without casual fans. Having zero casual fans would kill the league. So if they are flocking elsewhere in droves, that's an issue. That is, if you actually care about the NBA. Obviously, I care more than the average fan. There's like 1,000 videos on this channel, and then I got 2.5 more channels on top of that. Like seriously, if the NBA became irrelevant tomorrow, then so do I. But enough about me. What about you? Would you rather NBA crowds be full of a bunch of dorks with clipboards talking amongst each other about whether or not you should hedge on the Jarrett Allen screen? Or like mostly semi-normal people who are just there to have a good time? With all due respect to my fellow NBA dorks out there, okay, I am you, and most of my friends are you. We suck. I don't know if there's a worse member of an NBA audience than me. I do not clap, I do not yell, I don't jump for t-shirts. I'm there to watch basketball. And if we're being real, the crowds are going to end up being a lot more empty if it's just up to us to fill those seats. I want the NBA to be a global product. Fuck gatekeeping it. Basketball is for everyone. James Naismith himself said the game was specifically designed to be enjoyable for the spectator, specifically designed for as many people as possible to enjoy it, whether you're playing, coaching, or just watching. Casual fans are why the NBA community exists, and I only want to see that community expand. I want us all to have something to come together and enjoy. So the NBA somehow, some way, needs to fix itself. I don't know if it can afford not to. Because if they don't, by 2028 or 2030, the NBA is gonna look like Modern Warfare 3 2. But how exactly can we turn this ship around? A popular talking point lately has been expansion. Perhaps by the time this video finds you, the NBA has 32 teams and the Grizzlies or Timberwolves are in the Eastern Conference. The idea here is that the talent juice inherently gets a bit diluted when you add teams. If players are the flavor, then the teams are the water and the league is the container, I guess. But I'm not sure if that's enough of a solution, because at the end of the day, these playoff teams are going to be able to protect their most important rotation players. So there's not going to be some guaranteed star for the next NBA franchise in Idaho to build around. It's a start, but only a start. And with the growth of basketball globally, that only means a larger group of talent to choose from. And the NBA today has way more opportunity to develop that talent than ever before. I also think roster expansion may have, just maybe, seriously, big maybe, have been a mistake. It's a lot easier to find a diamond in the rough when you have an excess of rough. It feels cruel to say this, but the reason the 100th best player in the NBA today 20 years ago would be better than a top 25 guy is because there's just so much opportunity for guys now. In the past, when the NBA had tighter roster restrictions and less focus on their developmental lower level league, teams had to let guys go from the end of their bench who only had a glimmer of potential. You couldn't comfortably gamble on the potential of your 11th best player because you needed to be sure that was a vet who could play meaningful playoff minutes if called upon. Now, every team in the league has a project player or two. Especially the best ones. Is limiting the NBA's system for farming talent a good idea? I don't know, it feels a little bit wrong. Because at the same time, it's nice that these fringe guys have a real opportunity where they wouldn't have before. More dreams are coming true, more opportunity and player freedom. These are all good things and perhaps not worth sacrificing for the small chance that it's actually instrumentally bad for the league in some overly elaborate way. The developmental nature of the modern NBA has far less obvious of a relationship to the fan experience than that of the media though. So in the immediate future, the NBA really needs to invest in the storytelling surrounding their game. The new TV deal should shake things up. Let's pray it's in a good way. We need to demand higher quality programming that respects the viewer's time and intelligence. It would go a long way towards making the NBA a lot more beautiful and consumable of a product. But right now, rather than getting swept up in the magic of sports theater, when I go to watch NBA League Pass, this is my experience. First, I give the NBA all of my money. Turn on my TV, which is hopefully connected to excellent Wi-Fi, because otherwise it'll buffer. I click on the app, sit through the lag as it's loading up. Then, after I'm done waiting, I push an arrow button on my remote a few times to scroll to a game that I'd like, but it lags, so I wait again. Finally finish that, then press OK to pick the game I've spent all this time trying to scroll to. It loads, I wait, and then, oh my fucking god, there's an unskippable 30-second ad. And I know because I've been here before that if I dare to watch a different stream besides for the default one, like the condensed all possessions option that I like to use a lot, then I have to play the scroll and wait minigame, hopefully clicking on the right one, just to watch another unskippable 30-second ad, and then I can finally watch my NBA basketball game of choice on the official NBA app for a smooth ad-free experience where, wait, how do I turn the captions off? Where are these captions coming from? Oh, and it's lagging because I clicked to check how to change it. Okay. I guess you can't turn the captions off. Guess I'll just accept this and renew my subscription for next season. And then, when I'm on my phone, the app crashes half the time. So then there's that issue. Simple quality of life stuff like this goes a long way. People usually take the path of least resistance, and if there are more user experience obstacles on the NBA app than that of an illegal website where you have to click out of 3 pop-up hentai ads, people are going to choose to click out of the 3 pop-up hentai ads. Meanwhile, the NBA keeps seeming to employ the most out-of-touch app developers alive on their staff, or direct them into dumbfounding decisions like focusing on courtside VR tech or new and innovative ways to get people addicted to gambling. Instead of all that garbage, how about you just make your product super accessible, not frustrating to use, maybe have some tasteful ads on a low-cost version, and an ad-free version for full price? I guarantee your viewership would skyrocket. Illegitimate streaming services being the more convenient option from a functionality standpoint is downright unacceptable. The intrusive ads for a service that I pay for already is what really gets to me. But it's a great example of what I am saying about over-monetization, being forced to watch a minute of ads after a minute of loading just to get hit with another ad between choosing versions of the game I want to watch is simply way more time than just going to the hentai peddler's website where they screen mirror a jailbroken Fire Stick on OBS for free. Sometimes they even put a little cat on the stream instead of commercials. Isn't that lovely? But if they do not fix their broken, expensive app, then I don't know what more the NBA can do. As far as shaping the game played on the floor goes, I think the NBA has done what it can. If anything, it's testing the bounds in which executives of the league are even capable of controlling the action on the floor. 2024 saw both historical offense and defense in the same season because Adam Silver sent a message to referees during the All-Star break saying we need to fix the offense problem, but they can't control everything. I know that if it were up to the NBA itself, we wouldn't have seen 5 games in the 2024 finals. That's for sure. So to dig us out of this unmarketable hole, it cannot just be left up to the executives of the NBA. Perhaps we need another dynasty to arise to bring back an era of continuity, one that's easier for casuals to consume, where the NBA has a main character, While the NBA's media landscape scrambles to find their face of the league, I think the next generation of NBA imagery will be less oriented towards the individual and more focused on the collective. A dynasty as the NBA's protagonist. Or antagonist, depending on who you ask. So as much as us dorks may have spent years and years cursing its name, in order for the league to prosper, I think the dynasty must return. Fortunately, there seems to be hope on the horizon for an age of Celtics dominance that stands the chance to unify the world over a mutual hatred of Boston sports. All of this said, I love the NBA. That hasn't changed, but sometimes it doesn't love me back in the way I'd like it to. Either way, I'm going to keep yapping about its problems and the occasional solution, and I'll try to remain as optimistic as I can within reason. But when it comes to the NBA Finals, there has been a clear, unignorable decline in viewership and cultural relevance that could end up burning this league out in the long haul. I said earlier that you can't directly compare the NBA today to the 70s for commercial reasons, and in many ways that might be true. But consider this. In the 70s, they had very few channels. But now there has never been more competition for your attention. And if you're still listening at this point, then I have successfully gained yours. And again, I really appreciate it. It's basically what makes my whole life possible. But you beautiful, gorgeous Rusty Buckets fan, you are unfortunately an outlier as far as the algorithm is concerned. The NBA will never regress to the likes of the 70s, where some crazy low salary can get you Hall of Famers and games aren't broadcasted live. But if this trend continues, then don't be shocked if the value of the league eventually starts to decline. Until then, me, Rudy, and anyone else that helps along the way are going to continue to do what we do from beyond the sidelines. If you want to help us do that, then check out our Patreon. That link will be in the description. There you can get extended cuts of these videos as well as access to a community Discord. If you're not convinced by that, well, if you want to actually see the extended version, that is going to be linked in the description so that you can see what kind of content you're actually getting. But if you want to skip all of that and just simply leave us a like, or just given the fact that you've made it this whole way, either way, you're making a huge difference for us, and we appreciate you for it. Thank you to all of the people who have subscribed to our Patreon already. We would love to add to the roster, but their names are going to be scrolling here. Thanks so much for watching, and I cannot wait to see you in the next one.